All right, we are here with Gene Bohensky of Reel to Reel Warehouse, and we're going to talk a little bit about his business, Reel to Reel Warehouse. So the first question I want to start with is, why did you start this business, and where does your passion for tape come from?
Well, thanks, Mario. Well, I started Reel to Reel Warehouse about 3 years ago, right after COVID. I was playing around with reel to reel tapes. I bought a lot of on eBay, which I've been doing for years for fun. And I discovered all these new brands and types of tapes that I haven't used before. And I was using my Tascam 3030 machine and started making my own tapes off of Amazon HD streaming to see what that would be like. And I was amazed by this quality of the sound that I had on those tapes. I was running them at 15 inches per second. They were at fast speed, but I was using 50 and 60-year-old tapes to get essentially perfect sound. So, the light bulb went up in my mind, thinking, my gosh, this is really something that has to get out there. People have to realize that you can use all the old tapes. My history with tape recording goes way back to when I was 3 or 4 years old. My first memories are when my dad brought his Sony TC355 machine home, and I was mesmerized by those reels going around. I mean, it's something to look at, right? You watch those reels go around. There's something mesmerizing to that. And I was captured as a kid. I started making my own recordings when I was 5 on his machine, just recording songs from the radio. When I was 8, my dad bought me an old Webcore machine to start working on. I was taking that apart as a kid, as a hobby, trying to get that thing to work. I could never get that old machine to work. And it would never sound right, so I understood that the old machines didn't really sound like the new machines. But I was one of those, probably the last of the generation of people that I remember through high school. I was still into reel-to-reel tapes. I wanted a new machine. I got the new TIAC X300 with an EE tape that I was excited about. That was around 1984. And I continued using the machines through college as, just listening to music at home or in my dorm. And I was really the only one at the time who was doing that. I was really the last of the people using machines at home for fun, right? So I kind of went to CDs like a lot of other people did, because that's how music was consumed. That's how you got music. But I got back into tape not long afterwards, because I also play in the band, and my brother and I decided to start a recording studio. This is 1994 in our basement. We had a house together. And that brought me back to using reel-to-reel on a semi-professional level, which I didn't have experience. We went from a 4-track, actually 4-track cassette. Then we went to 8-track reel-to-reel. Then we went to 16-track reel-to-reel half-inch tape. We were using those tapes until 2006, and then we went to. For the studio, we went to full digital in the studio. We had our own challenges because it's a lot of time to do it with tape, and we didn't have a lot of time, so we went with digital with that. With mixed results. Around that time, I started my reel-to-reel transfer business. So I was still into tapes. I started getting the tapes from people to transfer to digital. I had a website, oldmediatransfer.com. I was doing that, just as a hobby. And people were sending me their old recordings, so I got used to that.
These were mostly multi-track recordings?
No, the people would, it's a cultural thing. When people got the tape recorders in the 50s and 60s, they were really expensive. So they Brush called it the sound mirror. There were others where the thought was capturing memories, capturing sound, which was unique at the time. So what people used to do would be recording their holiday gatherings and family histories. They were recording of Christmas or Hanukkah or any type of holiday that they were into.
It's interesting because when you think of home memories from that time period, most people think of Super 8 film or something along those lines. Usually, at least in my experience, I don't hear people often talk about the sound recordings. So I guess that's not something that maybe some people think about, of that people were doing that, capturing their holidays and stuff like that on audio form.
And family histories. People would do family histories. And I get all kinds of interesting transfer projects. I had one person that came to me with a slew of little voice tapes. For a while they would have the little 3-inch reels, and you would record your voice on it, and you could send that in as a letter.
Mm-hmm.
So a voice letter.
Yeah.
And I got a whole bunch of tapes where somebody was stationed in Alaska as like the chaplain and mayor of like a remote Alaskan town, and he'd send a history of what he was doing. And 35 years later, somebody wanted those to be transferred. I got all kinds of interesting transfer projects.
Mm-hmm.
So people used those recordings to preserve history. So that's what a lot of that was.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it was recording, transcribing people's, music that they recorded.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it was oral history.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the age of ultimate convenience and everything being cost effective, why would someone record on tape?
Well, there's a couple of good reasons. First of all, it's a true archival medium. That means that the right tapes will probably play in 100 years. If you had other media, like putting something on a digital file, the chances of that lasting long, unless you have a real archival process to make sure you're copying those, it's most likely not going to last. Or you have your things on your phone, and then your phone dies, and then everything goes with your phone. How many people has that happened to?
Yeah.
The other thing is the sound. The sound quality that people listen to has declined over the years. People are listening to compressed music through their phone with headphones, and the sound is just not there. The old analog recordings had a real depth to the sound, a real sound stage, particularly when you're recording analog instruments, like when you're recording vocals or jazz instruments or bands. The sound was just very pleasurable to the ear. First they used tube equipment, then later electronic equipment. There's something about the process of transferring sound, through the tape heads, and have that through magnetism, magnetizing the tape. There's something through that process that makes the sound better to the human ear.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really explainable, but I've done this myself. We've actually done mastering where we've recorded digitally, and then we put the sound out of the computer through 2 preamplifiers and then record them on an analog tape, and it's a more pleasurable, more nicer sound than the original digital.
Yeah.
Of course, all the technologists, all the engineers, when they look at the curves and the frequency response curves and the signal to noise ratio measurements, it's obvious that you can't compete with digital on raw numbers.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as actually what it sounds like. So the sound is awesome, and the sound is at the end of the tape, the best tapes have a near perfect sound, as you find yourself.
Yeah.
You don't get a noticeable degradation from your hearing from when you're reproducing with tape. It sounds pretty much perfect. So
I forget what the name of the curves are that I'm about to talk about, but I'll put the name on the screen. But human hearing, it doesn't react like in a digital mean. It doesn't look at all frequencies at the same decibel level. The lower frequencies, you need more energy for the human ears to. Right. So like when people compare like the digital representation of sound, sure, maybe to a computer it sounds great, but to the human ear, that's not how we experience sound. So what you're saying with analog tape, kind of shaping the sound to be more pleasing to the ears, well, that makes perfect sense.
I think you got to hear it for yourself, and I've done enough A/B testing. Like I have old tapes from the 50s. I have this old Jackie Gleason tape, Velvet Brass, which was brought out in 1957.
Mm-hmm.
And an old 2-track inline head recording. You put that on, and then you put the CD version of those tracks remastered, and you ask people what sounds better, what sounds more pleasing to your ear. They'll always pick the tape.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just something about that soundstage. It doesn't sound so metallic. It has this warm, pleasing sound.
Another thing that I think people get tripped up on, and I admit I myself was ignorant on the facts at first, but when people think of, let's just say, 1950s song, and they think of the sonic capabilities, they're thinking of certain playback medium restrictions on the sonic abilities. Whether you're listening to it on a 78 record or a vinyl record, the frequency spectrum is diminished, and they kind of forget the fact that the actual source material, the actual tape it was recorded on, sounds fantastic. It can't be beat. And a lot of artists that not remasters, but the re-releases of some of the albums that are put out, they're not actually from the old tapes anymore, because old tapes have been lost for years. They're actually rips of old 78s or different pressings, so I think a lot of people get confused and think old recordings, bad fidelity. And that's not the case at all. If you have the actual source tape material, it's fantastic. Sonic reproduction.
Yeah, for the most part in the studios, when they were running the first generation of tapes that were made, and we'll go over the different generations later, they were being run at 15 inches per second, either as a full track mono or dual track stereo. Now, when you're putting the tape across your head at that speed, first of all, you have a lot of surface area, right? So one aspect of that is that any mechanical issues with the tape, you don't really hear as much if you have any kind of flaw in the tape. At 15 inches per second, you really can't hear a splice like you would at a slower speed. So splicing becomes possible. And you pretty much had a full frequency range in the early 50s when you had studio recordings made at that speed. I mean, I have a bunch of original session tapes of this famous. I don't own them, but I've worked with the original session tapes from Paul Wittgenstein's left-handed piano recording. He actually rented out Carnegie Hall in 1956, and he rented the best equipment at the time, and they were all old audio tapes from 1956, 15 inches per second, and those tapes sound fantastic. I mean, they sound like they were recorded yesterday. And so that professionally, the access to have near perfect recording was there in the early 50s, if not before that.
So you obviously have a business that specializes in used tape. Why would someone use used tape over the new tape that Recording the Masters or ATR is putting out?
Well, first of all, the new tape that is available is fantastic tape. I don't want to say anything negative about it. If you can afford it, if you have projects that call for it, and your machines are adjusted for the new tapes, they're fantastic. I'm really appealing to the hobbyist, and I have basically two missions for my website and my business. The first part of the mission that I found was just giving the community information on which tapes are usable and which are not. That's not an easy question. If you go to a garage sale or you inherit a box of tapes, most people, when they were recording tapes, they used tapes over maybe a 20-year period in their household. And you might get tapes from the mid-60s to the mid-80s, or from the early 60s to the early 80s. And those tapes are going to vary in quality from the tapes that when they were made at the time, what was state of the art at the time, to how tapes developed, and that some of those tapes can be used because they have formulas and production processes that have created tapes that stood the test of time, and you have others that are no good for various reasons. So if you're a newbie, how do you know which tape is good?
Yeah.
How do you know what you can use? What makes sense? So the first part of what I started was to create a website that would catalog all of the tapes that were ever made and offer the hobbyist and the archivist information on whether you can use it, whether you need to prep it, like with baking or other means to play it, whether it was possible to, that it's useful again. From the business side, what I wanted to do was make it possible for people to buy tape, guarantee it, right, and explain to them that this tape can be used. That you can take a tape out of the box, right? You can take the tape out of the box and use it as a new tape, and be confident that this tape can be used and kept in your collection for many years.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where I came from. So that really to make it easier for people, right? So, and I'm not finished with the mission. There's still a lot more information I got to add. But ultimately, what I'd like to know is that, if you have an Akai GX77 machine, or a Sony TC355, or a TEC 2100, that you can go and find tapes that are useful, that are the best of when they were made, that you can buy them and use them, and they're exactly what your machine called for, right? Because the newer tapes, as fantastic as they are, they're not necessarily compatible with the older machines, right? They weren't designed for the older machines. They have an output and a bias requirement that the old machines, it might not be possible to make accurate recordings with your old machines.
Yeah.
And the tapes are really overkill for what those old machines want. And if you're a hobbyist, if you're just recording from a streaming service, or you're recording your old records, or you're doing voice recordings, it doesn't make sense necessarily to spend a lot of money on tape. But if you're recording a band and you have one of the later machines and you have a multi-tracker and you wanna make sure that you're using the best and you have the budget, then by all means, it's new tape is better right away. What I don't know is how's that new tape going to last in 50 years? I don't know. We know how some of these tapes are going to last in 50 years because some of them are 50 years old.
Yeah.
I've always said that if a tape is made it this far at 50 years, it'll most likely make it another 50.
Yeah.
Right? A new tape that was newly developed, you have no idea what chemicals they're using, what binders they're using, what lubricants they're using, whether they've done the testing to make sure that those tapes will last 50 years.
Yeah.
Right?
So you obviously have a wide variety of different used tapes available. What makes one tape different than the next? What would a consumer look for when they're on your website trying to choose which tape to buy?
What I tried to do with all the tapes made was first to help that was to create a new tape classification system. I did that because looking back on tape production, tape production changed from its inception really in the late 40s is when it started in the United States anyway. They had tape production from the late 30s actually in Germany. That's another part of the history. But it really started here in the late 40s, and the consumer market started in the 1950s. So tape production started and continued well into reel-to-reel tapes, well into the 90s. Tape production continued as people moved to videotape and then computer tape for storage of data. So there is a progression in technology and capability of the tape over time, right? So I wanted to look back and create a classification system that kind of would match the tapes with their relative performance and connect those performance grades to the machines you have, right? So that if you have a really old machine, like an Akai M8 from the late 60s, right, you're going to want to know what tapes were available at the time that are useful. So that's kind of where that background came from. During each production phase, there were some pretty fantastic tapes made, and a lot of research and development was spent on making tape production better.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of investment and research and innovation that was made over that time, and you can see that in the products over time. And so what I tried to do is select the best brands and types which we can guarantee. So Reel-to-Reel Warehouse guarantees the tapes for 90 days. That means you take them home, you play. They're supposed to play and record as new.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, we'll replace or refund your money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many people would do that to a 50-year-old tape, right? Would you guarantee a 50-year-old product, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to know what you're doing, because you don't want to guarantee the wrong tape.
Yeah.
Sell people the wrong stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know what you have. So that's kind of where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
We serve a wide variety of people. There's new hobbyists that are getting into it, right? Young guys like you, people in their 30s, 40s. I've always wanted a tape machine. There's a lot of old guys like me and older than me who now have time. They might be retired, and they're going back to the things that they liked to do when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for the first time, they can get one of the machines they lusted after when they were young. Because remember, reel-to-reel tape recording was never an inexpensive hobby. It was never something that everybody did. It was always for the people who can afford it. The machines were expensive back then,
Mm-hmm.
and the tapes were expensive. So the people who got into it were committed to it. And so we serve everybody, right? There's people that remember. I used to love Memorex tapes. I want Memorex. I want Sony, right? They buy what they're used to. They buy what they like. They buy what they know what worked on their machines.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to facilitate all that
Mm-hmm.
all together.
What are the future goals for the company? Do you have any plans for selling multi-track tape, like 1-inch tape or anything of that nature?
So my plans are, first of all, my plans is to continue to build out the website with more recommendations with
Mm-hmm.
the right tapes. I've had a lot of requests for multi-track tape. One of the challenges with the multi-track tape, as a lot of people know, is that most of it suffers from sticky shed syndrome, which means it goes sticky and you can't play it without baking. And so what we're trying to research and try to get our hands around whether we can successfully sell tape that has been baked and
Mm-hmm.
processed
Mm-hmm.
and erased, and how long that person can use that tape as for a project. So far the evidence shows that they could be useful for up to a year, which means that if you're working on a project that could be a sufficient length of time to be able to use on a project.
Mm-hmm.
We've also done research on whether you can rebake tapes multiple times, and you can. So that is the challenge with the multi-track tapes, which we're getting a handle on. There's a lot of it out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of multi-track tape out there that people are in the process of throwing away. And I think a lot of it, I'm hoping a lot of it can be saved and used inexpensively.
Yeah.
Because new tape is expensive, right?
Yeah, I think I use recording the masters 1-inch tape. I think it's more than $200 right now. I think it's like $220, give or take. I mean, it's 30 minutes of recording time for $220 basically. It's expensive.
Right, and so it doesn't really lend itself well to taking a bunch of tapes and playing around with it. So I had a guy actually met who was a recording engineer for one of Rolling Stone's albums.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in the city, I forget what it was, in the mid 90s.
Okay.
And for that album, his job was to go through all the tapes and find the jams that were useful.
Yeah.
They went through 500 reels of 2-inch tape. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They went through 500 reels of 2-inch tape for that record. Now, that's a lot. I mean, just think about 500 times $200.
Yeah.
How much is that? Right? That's a lot of. That's $100,000 worth of tape.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, if you're a hobbyist, like I have a 1-inch machine here. You know, if you're a hobbyist, if you want to play around with stuff, play around with recording, right? You don't want the cost of tape to restrict what you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, when we had our studio, I was buying used tape on eBay, used 1/2-inch tape, and I was paying $25 a reel. It was new. It was $50 a reel back then.
Okay.
I mean, this is mid '90s, late '90s. But I would try to find the stuff that was $25 a reel, maybe without flanges.
Yeah.
Where we could, roll the tapes.
Yeah.
And play, and get some stuff down. Right. I mean, when you're recording a band, right, and you're improvising and you're jamming, you want to record it, and maybe that's something you want to save. But if you got to use that 2-inch tape and you got to just use, that's all you got.
Yeah.
It's it's tough.
Well, that's why I think what you're doing with Reel to Reel Warehouse is so important for, I get a lot of younger kids in my YouTube channels emailing me, what tape machine should I buy? I don't know if I can afford it, etc., etc. And your used tape business, I think, is kind of the gateway for someone who just wants to dip their toes in and kind of test it out and have some fun. And what you're saying, particularly with, you don't want the cost of tape to prohibit you from experimenting and practicing. Being a recording engineer takes practice. You're not going to get it right in the first time, and I think that's really important. And right now you really specialize in 1/4-inch tapes. I recommend, if you're someone watching who is younger or any age really, who just hasn't been in the tape recording world or realm before, get a 1/4-inch tape and just do your mix downs. Even if you're recording on a computer, just mix it down on that. And I don't like to tell people it's going to be the magic potion to make your mixes pop and sound analog, or what people say, but to me it's more about the process, the fun of it, the feeling of it, putting the tape on. It's everything combined.
Right. It's a very tactile experience.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So that's why I wanted to talk to you today and really give this business as much exposure as possible, and hopefully get some new customers for you that are watching this video.
Great. Well, we want to expand, and we do have some 1/2-inch tape that I have that's baked. I have some of that available. We end up always having some. Some of it comes in. I'm looking to expand that. People want to get rid of it, don't know what to do with it. So we make it available, and we make it available at a very reasonable price.
Yeah.
Basically, the empty reels are alone now worth $30. So I sell the tape for maybe $38, right?
Yeah.
So, I want to make sure that I sell it for as good a price as possible, so people can buy it, people can use it. To make sure it keeps the hobby alive. It keeps the people into it. If at $100 a tape or $150 a tape, yes. Though companies making that tape, that's what it costs to make. I mean, I'm not faulting them for the pricing being high. It's going to cost that much. So, but unfortunately, that high cost prohibits, widespread adoption because it's just so expensive.
Yeah, I mean, something that I've certainly learned from you the past couple times we've spoken is that you're really passionate about this stuff. You're not in it to make a big buck, and the prices on your website reflect that. You're selling stuff for a reasonable amount, and you're not looking to overcharge people or anything like that. And when people go on your website, it's going to be obvious, because if anyone has been interested in buying used tapes and you went on eBay, that the prices people can ask for it are ridiculous sometimes.
Yeah, and we try to keep the prices at or slightly below the market price. We always add to the fact that we guarantee them. If they don't work or there's a problem, we replace them. We're pretty good at making sure we're only selling stuff that's good, right? We try. We don't want to sell any tape that's been spliced.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that the right tape goes with the box. A lot of people didn't. When people were using tape, there was all kinds of users. A lot of people didn't put the right tape in the right box. I mean, you can get something, and it's not what you think it is. So we make sure that the right tape is in the right box. If we don't know the tape, we don't sell it. Right? There's some Sometimes we get thrown for a loop, and tape comes in, and we don't know who made it.
Yeah.
Particularly stuff in the late '60s and '70s. There were some manufacturers that changed formulations, and I'm not up on every single thing that was done in the late '60s.
Yeah.
That was really, really long time ago. But for the most part, all the later formulations are pretty much easily identifiable.
Yeah.
And we make sure that you get, if you want a Maxell UD, you get a UD. The right UD is in the box according to the. I mean, with Maxell, it's even more challenging because they have specific generations, and the leader, they changed the leader tape color
Mm-hmm.
for the formula and the generation, and you have to make sure you match the right formula to the box.
Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
can't just put an old UD in a new box.
Yeah, but if anyone knows anything about tape heads, is that they're very pedantic and want everything to be exactly right. And
Well,
Yeah.
because their machines are a lot.
Yeah.
They're very specific because the machines are specific to those tapes. If
Mhm.
they have experience, everybody comes into it with their experience, which is at a specific time in history. Right? I can't explain this so let me explain it in this way. If you got into tape in 1974, you're going to go down to the audio stores or the department stores, and you're going to buy the tape that's available that year.
Yeah.
And every year you go to the store, there's a different range of tape available, right? Companies come and go, people's formulas change, their box art changed over time, production process changed over time. So your experience is going to be based upon when you were introduced to the technology, when you started buying tape. At the time, in 1974, you couldn't buy tapes that were made in 1964.
yeah.
Maybe you can find them in a garage sale, but for the most part, anybody who was into the hobby,
Mm-hmm.
their tapes were their most treasured, possessions because
Yeah.
they were so expensive. They didn't just sell that. They didn't just put that stuff in a garage sale, and people in general didn't sell that stuff used.
Yeah.
So where would you find the tapes from 5 or 10 years ago? You wouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't. At any given time, it wasn't like today where you can go to eBay and buy something from
Mhm.
any. I mean, that just didn't exist, right? So how would you find it? How would you even know the history? It wasn't written anywhere, right? It's only now that everything is available, and people are getting rid of their stuff in large lots when their grandparents or their parents
Mhm.
pass away, or they want to sell what they have. Then you get these large lots of tapes and kind of figure out and do some forensic research to figure out what was there.
I mean, that is a really great luxury that you have such a wide variety and you have a steady stock that if people want their favorite brand of tape and favorite line of tape, that they can do just that. I mean, that's a big accomplishment that you've been able to do that.
We're trying. We
Mhm.
have as part of this, sourcing the tape is the biggest challenge. Finding sources of large lots of tape. I buy small lots, but it takes a lot of time. You can buy 20 here, 30 there. What I like is to buy 500-600 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I have one source in Japan that sends me 2 pallets every month, and I get a wide range of tape from them. In fact, we just got a pallet in, and you can see if you can, on the shelf is a lot of the interesting stuff that I get from Japan. I have a source in Germany. I've gotten pallets of tapes from one of my friends that sources tapes over there. I've gotten some from Canada, large lots from Canada, of course all over the U.S. I've even gotten a couple of lots from UK. So, each country had its own market and its own idiosyncrasies,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, the Germans, for example, they like double play tapes. And so most of the people bought double play tape, which is a little thinner. And they made double play tapes different in Germany than they did in America. Double play tapes here were thinner. So there's weird idiosyncrasies, and we didn't really buy a lot of them, right? In Japan, they didn't buy hardly any double play at all. Most of the companies didn't even make double play tape, and they used long play tape for professional use, people didn't do that in the U.S. or in Europe. They didn't use long play tape. They used standard play tape with the different thicknesses. They didn't use long play tape as professional tape here often, except for maybe for some broadcasts, but not for real recording. So it's every market is different, and what's available there is dependent on what people bought, right?
Well, Gene, I want to thank you very much for sitting down with me today and having this conversation. We are going to do a bunch of more videos with him. He's definitely going to be in a lot more future videos. We're going to film more today, actually. So stay tuned for that. And any last words before we sign off, Gene?
I'm excited about this, and I think it's great if anybody else gets into it. It's a fantastic hobby. There's a lot of interesting history to learn, and it's just a lot of fun. And definitely, my message to everyone is you can use the old tapes, right? You don't have to buy them from me. There's millions of old tapes available. They're available everywhere, in garage sales, in Goodwills, on eBay, on Craigslist, on Facebook Marketplace. By all means, use the site to figure out which ones are going to be useful.
Yeah, well, I can't emphasize that enough, that his website breaks down tape brands, different lines of tape, different generations. I mean, you could get lost on your website in a good way. I mean, in the information, get lost in the amount of work you put in cataloging all that. It's very, very. It's the greatest resource on the internet, in my opinion. I couldn't find anything like it.
And we're going to try. And there's still more to learn. We're learning and updating the listings and adding listings every month as we find out more, as I learn more. And things also change. Sometimes we find things out about tape that we didn't know.
Yeah.
So also, I reach out to anybody if anyone has experience they want to share with me to help update some of that information. I'm willing to listen.
All right. Thank you very much, Gene.
You're welcome.
We will see you guys next time.
All right.